Warm welcome to the second day of our European History Forum. I very much hope you had a good night, a good sleep tonight. The weather is becoming a bit more challenging. This also concerns our guided tours this afternoon, but anyway, we will make it. Before giving the floor to our next fishbowl round here with my colleague Clara as the moderator, I have just a few technical announcements to make. First, some little leftovers regarding bureaucratic issues. Not all participants from abroad have kind of signed the necessary documents and all this stuff. So we very much ask you right after this session at 12 or 12:15 to approach again Nina and Irina, my colleagues, who will be downstairs. Yeah, Nina, where are you? Yeah, in the foyer. Yeah, to finish this process, which is very important for us as organizers. Second, as you know, the public part of this conference ends at 12 o'clock. Invited participants continue with the non-public part of the conference this afternoon. And from 2 o'clock on, we will split up in three or four working groups, as you can see in the agenda. We are offering the possibility to have what we called open working group, which means if somebody of you feels the wish or the need to deepen some topics that are not covered by the topics offered in the existing 3 working groups, you have the possibility to open a 4th one. Yeah? There is space, there is technical equipment, whatever, but it should be announced, of course, in advance. So if there is an initiative of some of you to invite people to a 4th working group, we would ask you to approach us during the lunch break to get ready for this 4th working group. If there's none, no problem. We will continue with the 3 already prepared working groups. And regarding the rest of the afternoon and evening program, we will tell you after the lunch break. Okay? So thank you very much. And Clara, the floor is yours.
Yeah, thank you, Walter, and welcome to everyone, also from my side, to the second day of the European History Forum. As Walter already announced, my name is Clara and I'm the head of the Department of Contemporary History here in the Böll Foundation. I'm quite new by Böll, and I had for the first time this year, the possibility to participate to the organization of this forum, and I want at this stage to really thank the warm welcome of the colleagues of the Department of Eastern and Southeastern Europe in the group of organizational group. I was really very happy to have the possibility to participate to this organization of this year. A part of working here at the foundation, I'm also a historian, specializing on history of Polish history, actually mostly of the 19th century, but also the Polish historiographical debates of the 1990s were part in the past of my research. And this morning I have the pleasure of chairing our last fishbowl with the title, The Imagination of Europe in the 90s, Ideas, Spaces and Politics. So yesterday we began and ended the day with 2 very interesting discussions about the 90s as an object of production of historical knowledge production and of memory practices. While in the fishbowls during the days, we looked at the grand narratives of the violent, not violent. It was a very interesting discussion, implosion of the Soviet Union in Yugoslavia, as well as the much more marginalized narrative of the 90s as renegotiation moment for gender relations. Today, in our third fishbowl, we want to look at another key narrative of the 90s, that of Europe. The fall of the Berlin Wall opened up completely new possibilities for thinking about Europe as a political space, but also for experiencing Europe as a geographical space and for shaping the idea of Europe. On the one hand, the 90s were marked by rhetoric about, and we had this already yesterday, about the countries of Central and Eastern Europe that were returning to Europe or catching up with Europe. And we had also already yesterday this rhetoric based on a quite problematic equation of Europe with Western Europe, and and created an asymmetrical relationship actually between Western Europe and Eastern Europe, as Eastern Europe was declared to be not fully yet European, and while Western Europe was presented as the standard of modernity and democracy. On the other hand, it was exactly in the 90s that the first war on European soil since the Second World War took place, with all the relating debates about Europe's role in it, but also about the belonging of this conflict to the European idea. Maria Todorova developed her theories about the construction of the Balkan as kind of not really Europe, exactly in the right of these discussions. Finally, the first years of the 90s were also a very special and crucial moment for the European Union, as the unification of Europe took a major step forward with Maastricht, but also encountered its first significant opposition. And we would like to discuss all these perspectives, the perspective in this fishbowl, with our three speakers. Florian Peters, who will tell us about Poland's experience with Europe. Nihad KreIševljeković, I hope I spoke it correctly, who will discuss the Bosnian idea of Europe. And Viktor Jaeschke, who will shed light on the perspective of Western European countries. You can see there is also a fourth speaker sitting here with us. And we are very happy of this, to welcome Philipp Albrecht, the co-president of the Heinrich-Böll Foundation, which you met already yesterday, and you heard already yesterday. And Jan is discussing with us today, not as co-president, but actually as a former member of the European Parliament from 2009 until 2018, and thus as direct contemporary witness of the completion of Eastern European enlargement. He will tell us about his impressions and memories from his time in Brussels. I very much regret that the panel has such as a gender imbalance, which is related to our bad luck in inviting female speaker to this special fishbowl. But I'm still very happy to discuss with all of you. And I'd invite even more not male people to join us in the discussion in the fishbowl. Let's start now. And for first input, I would want to give the word to Florian Peters. Florian is a historian specializing in the contemporary history of Poland and Eastern Central Europe. He received his PhD from Humboldt University of Berlin. Actually, Florian and I were also briefly colleagues at the European University of Jena, but currently he's a member of the interdisciplinary research cluster Structural Chains of Property at the Friedrich Schiller Universität Jena. His last book is devoted to the post-socialist transformation in Poland. So, dear Florian, how would you describe the Polish perspective on Europe and the West after 1989?
Thank you very much at first for inviting me, and I mean I have to make a first caveat in the first part. I mean there cannot be the talk of any Polish perspective in a singular, of course, as in any case. I think this goes for any perspectives we are going to discuss here. There have been so many different, there has been a plurality of Polish perspectives, and I would have a hard job to summarize them all. So I will now try to give a broad short outline more than in this few minutes which I have been asked to speak here, than giving an overview about the multitude and plurality of Polish perspectives connected not only to transition to democracy, to capitalism, but also to connected to the imagination of Europe, which we are supposed to discuss today. So maybe I start by referring back to our discussion yesterday about the challenging task actually to historicize the time we are talking about, to develop a truly genuinely historical approach to a time which seems so close in many respects to many of us. And I have come across once a great quote from Timothy Garton Ash when he was writing about these turbulent changes of 1989, he wrote at one place, the most difficult task for future historians who will researching or narrating this time will be to find out what people at a certain moment of time did actually not know about the future. So I think this is a very important thing we need to have in mind, that we have to, that we always have to, as historians, our task is to reconcile in a way contemporaries' experiences and contemporaries' expectations of the future, of course, with our wisdom of hindsight, so to speak. Yeah, and this is a task I'm trying to get along with. You may judge in how far this will be successful. But I start this way because. I think from our perspective nowadays, also if we look and compare Poland with Ukraine, for example, or other countries of East Central Europe, Poland is quite a lot, by many, especially economists, seen as a success story of economic and partly also of a democratic transformation. And I think we should, if we go back to the beginning of the 90s, we should keep in mind that that people, contemporaries, did not think about Poland at all as a success story then. Yeah, folks would have been really surprised, I guess, in the early 90s, for most of the 90s actually, if they had heard that their country would be praised once as Europe's growth champion. But what they did know then was that they, and what they actually also took pride in, was their role as forerunners of Eastern European democracy and independence movements, embodied, of course, in the nationwide trade union movement of Solidarność, starting in 1980, 81, and yeah, also playing an important role in the later transformation of 1989. Unfortunately, I would say for Poland, this pioneering role in bringing down communism, so to speak, was often praised in soapbox speeches by Western politicians, but hardly reflected in tangible Western support after 1989. So people were pretty much talking about return to Europe, and people, and they, of course, in soapbox speeches on Sundays, the Eastern Europeans were welcomed to return to Europe, but this was, yeah, quite on the tangible, substantial financial level, not. This was not really tangible, and Western help was rather concerned with the de facto state of bankruptcy of a late socialist Poland, which had been a problem for all of the 80s already. So Western help to overcome the deep economic crisis proved to be really limited and conditional to quite harsh austerity measures, you know, that neoliberal reform. So Poland actually this trade union movement, Solidarność, which started to fight for workers' dignity and workers' rights, was actually pressed to implement the first blueprint of a neoliberal shock therapy in this area of the world, actually, in Eastern Europe. Although one should actually add that a few years later, Poland did indeed receive a 50% cut in its foreign debt, which was quite unique for a non-development country. But this was a little later already. What is more, the 90s were this talk about return to Europe was in a way tainted for Poles by the fact that travel opportunities and also trading opportunities that had been quite liberal in the late 80s already for Poles were rather cut with the German reunification of 1990 then opened. So there's a quite an interesting complaint by Polish dissidents, former dissidents then, that in the very moment that the East started to open the borders, the West started to close them. Yeah. So, and this, of course, there was quite some political negotiation about that. Kohl and the West German government, they were quite they of course always pointed to Schengen. Yeah. So they would not be able to open to let in the Poles. They were more open to let in Czechs and Hungarians, which were in a better economic situation back then. But of course, all these negotiations, they were quite well remembered, I would say so. They were quite remembered by Poles, and they were also they were remembered as a pretty instrumentalist stance towards Europe. Towards this talk about Europe, which was in fact which was really hardly tangible in real politics if it came to market access, for example, in fields where Poland would have been able to compete. When it came later to the opening of labor markets, Germany was quite hesitant, as many of you may know, in comparison also to to Great Britain, for example, in this respect. And this instrumentalist stance by Western Europeans, and not least by Germans, of course, because Germany being the most important and direct Western neighbor of Poland is always quite a model of reference or model of distinction, of course, for Polish politicians. This has been to quite some extent, I would say, internalized by political forces, which also, until today, show a quite instrumentalist perspective, or exhibit a quite instrumentalist perspective toward European politics. Maybe we will hear more about that from you in a minute. So to conclude, I would argue for the long-lasting relevance of these early transformation years of the early 90s, also mid of the 90s, when economic crisis was really, when Poland was really still in deep economic crisis, even deeper than before because of shock therapy. And these years were not only, for the majority, I would say, so of ordinary Poles, they were not only marked by new chances and an opening, but also by quite humiliating experiences of labor migration, of working on the asparagus fields in Germany, for example, or in Western Europe. Yeah? And this is long-lasting in a certain generation. Of course, we have to differentiate there, of course, between different generations in Poland. But until now, this is a long-lasting experience for many, which still has its political consequences. I may only quote close with a quote by Jarosław Kaczynski from the last electoral campaign in autumn 23, so a few months ago. One of his promises, and this was a serious promise and repeatedly made in the electoral campaigns, was there will be no more Poles on German asparagus fields. So this was one of the measures for success of this national policies, economic rise of Poland. He has been proposing them. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Florian. And you are also perfectly on time, so also for this, thank you. And I would like now Nihad entering the conversation, and I want to also present him very briefly. Nihad is currently the director of the International Theatre Festival, MES, and the artistic director of the Memory Module Program, which deals with the effects of radical situations on art. He completed his studies in history at the Faculty of Philosophy in Sarajevo, and is author of several documentary films, theaters, productions, and books. And so, Nihad, I would ask you how you would describe the idea of Europe in Bosnia in the beginning of the 90s, and how did change this idea or this perception with the war?
Hello, everyone. I would start with the one thing, because when I used to read about it, what should we answer today, I just have to say that the idea of Europe in Bosnia is a very fluid term. So it depends through history for the long time. So I would start with the hope that Europeans knows what the Europe is, because for us who are waiting to be political part of the Europe is pretty much unclear concept. So to make this what Europe meant in the 90s, I would just remind for those maybe younger who doesn't know that Bosnia was the part of Yugoslavia, and that Yugoslavia had that for Yugoslavia, Europe had a different form. So, of course, there is a geographical form in which Bosnia was always part of the Europe, you know, but also Eastern Bloc and the Western Bloc and those things always had a different idea about, I would say, divided Europe. Also, as the role of the Communist Party, that we had a very strong relations to Soviet Yugoslavia, to Soviet Union. So we had that perception which affected on 48, when there was this clash between Tito and Stalin, when Yugoslavia, for that reason, was much more turned towards the Western Europe. And especially, I think, the important part of that, I mean, they were present in the Council of Europe, they were present in those European institutions, and especially important part was this Balkan alliance, in which were Turkey, Greece, and Yugoslavia, which basically put Yugoslavia in some way on the side of the NATO pact, you know. So in the 60s, also very important thing happened when Yugoslavia had a huge role in organizing non-aligned movement, which gave us something which I think Europe didn't experience. And I speak strongly from the point that Bosnia is much more Europe than Europe itself is Europe. So it's important, even, you know, when I speak, I talk about these political terms, you know, but I can, you know, like, I can assure you that we are Europe and that you are trying to find your way towards, I don't know what. Non-aligned movement, I'm mentioning for that reason, because it opened towards the world in totally different angle. I don't know how many Europeans are aware today about their colonial role and the mess they did all around the world. Yugoslavia, in that sense, offered a hand to this part of the world. Beside all those different political systems, dictators and stuff, but we understood something which was at least in ideas of Schumann's, in these basic ideas of Europe about the space of diversity, about the space. I love the quote, you know, united in diversity, united in differences, diversity. I don't know how much you are united in diversity if you consider one tiny spot of the planet Earth as a diversity, because diversity is something which is much wider thing and includes different cultures, because different cultures really exist. Even after the colonial wars, different cultures survived. It's good news for Europeans who believe that Europe has a future. So we are those who believe in future of Europe. So all these things I mentioned to come to Bosnia, because Yugoslavia was known as I mean, Latinka Perović, she mentioned that Yugoslavia was Europe before the Europe, you know, for Yugoslavians at least. We passed through very similar process to come together. Also, Bosnia and Herzegovina, you know that Austrian-Hungarian Empire also was the first union which reminded to something which is Europe today, and Bosnia was part of that. And Bosnia had a parliament in that period comparing to Kingdom of Yugoslavia, and they didn't have a parliament. But the most important thing happened in the 90s. And I will not quote everyone, but there are many people, of course, survivors are among those people who believe that the idea of Europe died in the 90s. People who believed in that, because in Yugoslavia, idea of Europe was idea about space of democracy, space of human rights, and economic prosperity. Today, young people coming to Europe, not so much about the human rights, not so much about democracy, but about some economic prosperity, which can be always lost, you know, so it's not something that it is given. As a kid, teenager, I was one of those who believed in Europe. And I thought, when you believe in something which is in relation to human rights and stuff like that, you don't expect that for the 4 years you will live under the siege, being exposed to snipers, to daily killing, to concentration camps. And result of that, one of the results of that, that when Russia starts aggression against Ukraine, all people in Europe talking about war on the European soil, because obviously we are, I guess, not European soil. Perspective of Europe, obviously I will, Clara is very strict about time, but the thing which I wish to say, there is this dark side of Europe, and you are showing that pretty much today, in my opinion, because, you know, like, I don't want to speak about that now, but there is a good side of Europe, and good side of Europe are many artists, many cultural workers, many intellectuals, and some politicians who are not among alive people, or, for example, one of them is a Polish guy, Mazowiecki, who resigned because he said that Europe is failure, basically. We can speak about intellectuals like Susan Sontag, who said to people, this is genocide. But like today, Europe was, you know, trying the way to explain to us what it is, you know, so we discovered it's not genocide. Later we did. The program Model Memory, which we started, you mentioned that. We started on 95 during the war with the idea to answer the question, it was during the war, to answer as an artist, because I find out that, you know, being historian, what do we learn from history, or we learn from CNN, or even some films or something like that. So we started the project with the idea to answer the question, how it is possible to have such an intensive economical, technological revolution, and in the same time of that, such a brutal destruction of the cities, of the cemeteries, raping women. The first program we organized was dealing with the experience of genocide. We invited Claude Lanzmann. We invited John Ringelheim. Both of them died. John Ringelheim was director of oral department of Holocaust Museum. Later, we discovered that we are becoming self-obsessed with our own destiny, because the only thing we find out is useful is to build the empathy. So we are very proud of that. I think that being empathetic is one of the most beautiful things that we learn from the war. And to make this shorter, because obviously, did I pass already?
No, don't worry. I'm going
okay.
to have
just
like
give me, just give me
2 minutes left. You have.
Okay. So the thing was, that in that process, you know, like we discovered how we are becoming, you know, like self-obsessed with ourselves. But there was one thing which we wish to share, and also the story about Europe. In Sarajevo, under the siege, in 4 years, we had in Sarajevo theaters 57 theater premieres. We had 2 film festivals. And all those things which happened were the way to prove to Europeans that we are normal, you know, like, because we wished, you know, like we thought that we should look normal, you know, because maybe somebody will react. They didn't react. Another thing, we find out, you know, like, that it's interesting that on May 17, 1992, one of the worst days of the siege of Sarajevo, Sarajevo War Theatre was founded. That was the only theater founded in Europe under war conditions. In my opinion, if it happened in Germany or France, we would all know the names of those people. Of course, nobody here doesn't know the names of those people. There are some actors, directors, you know. No, please, just finish. So the thing is, you know, that this ignorance is painful. And the thing that we wish, you know, like now I'm talking like the guy who's director of the festival and who runs this program, the things I just wish to share as a part of knowledge from that dark space of Europe, which is waiting to be accepted in European Union. For example, about the art. It's not normal to live in the space where Peter Handke can get the Nobel Award. It's not normal just because the guy supported the guy who committed genocide. And we came with the idea to say that talking about the art, because we believe that it's really important space, when we talk about it, we come with the knowledge based on experience. For that art is really basic human need, important for the societies, and that art is not just about aesthetics, but it can be only a synthesis of aesthetics and ethics. So when we talk about some people, like the one I mentioned, he's maybe a great writer, but not necessarily artist. So artist has an important role. And to finish with the last thing, why we are doing these programs today, which are programs about the culture of remembrance, and what things we try to keep as the memory of Europe, based in Bosnia, which is not politically a member, but something which we... It's the story that, for example, when we started that program, we thought how it could affect us, this experience. You know how in this basic psychology, they say how the kids who are raised in the violent families, where the father was a violent, that very often they become violent in their own families. Some people disagree, some agree. I'm among those who agree, of course, that we can apply that to collective experiences. So we have experience in region. The Serbs were victims of genocide in the Second World War. They are becoming perpetrators in our war. Tsvetan Todorov wrote about it too. The thing is that you don't make the revenge towards who harm you, but towards other. So we have other examples. We have example of Holocaust and situation today is in Palestine. So the only thing which we wish to do, which we hope to manage, is never to become perpetrators. And with this politics today, I'm afraid that it is the biggest aim for the Bosnians is not to become, unfortunately, just the member of European Union, but to remain there, to keep their humanity that they built, fighting for an idea of Europe which we are losing at the moment. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much for this very strong statement, and I'm sorry if I was like making stress with the time. But yeah, I would now like to give you the word, Victor, and to present also you very briefly. Victor Jaeschke is a historian and works as a postdoc at the Ludwig-Maximilian Universität in München. His research focus has been on the history of the European Union, and last year he defended his doctoral thesis at the University of Potsdam on competing concepts of Europe in France, Britain, Germany, and the European Commission in the context of the Treaty of Maastricht 1992. And dear Victor, you are now the one that is here like trying to explain the multiple perspective. I liked from both, you said both, there is not the one Polish perspective, there is not the one Bosnian perspective. Is way we are speaking here about multiple perspectives. So you are the one here in charge of explaining some of the multiple Western European perspectives. And to tell us about the reaction of the old members of the European Union to the fall of the Berlin Wall and the opening of the Eastern Europe. So how do they looked at the countries of the former Eastern Bloc and how the end of the blocs influenced actually the idea of the European unification in the 90s.
Thank you, Clara, for the kind introduction. Also, Thank you to the Heinrich-Böll-Stiftung for the invitation. It's a great pleasure to be here. And I will, in my short presentation, also contribute to the research agenda that was set out yesterday, that we as historians are supposed to make things more complicated and point towards the ambivalences, the ambiguities that often get lost in political discourse. So my general thesis would be that, that the responses of Western European states or the European Union to the opening of the East and the end of the East-West conflict were highly ambivalent, that they were certainly not always triumphant and positive, and that therefore they do not merit a singular label. I think the first thing that we need to understand is that the end of the East-West conflict and then the turbulent times of the early 1990s were felt in the West as an incredible acceleration of time, of acceleration of history even, and that out of this feeling of acceleration grew a whole plethora of different and sometimes contradictive responses. And for the sake of argument and also for the sake of our discussion, I want to group these responses into two broad categories. The first category is made up of rather hopeful, progressive visions of European unity. And progressive understood here not so much in a normative sense, but more in the sense of creating something entirely new. Because also in the West, the early 1990s were a time of rather wild imaginations, at least comparatively speaking. And I just want to give you a couple of examples. One example would be Hans-Dietrich Genscher, the long-time German foreign minister, who in a speech in March 1990 publicly fantasized about new international forms of cooperations that would ultimately would also make NATO and the Warsaw Pact obsolete. That was, for the time, a rather progressive idea bordering on craziness for some. At least Chancellor Helmut Kohl quickly called him off because he did not want one of his senior ministers to think about the end of NATO and the establishment of some alternative. Another example would be François Mitterrand, the French president's plans to create a Confédération Européenne, a European confederation. Here also the idea was to create a new international organization in which all European states would take part, including Russia, notably. And now, besides these visions of European unity, there existed a second category of responses to these turbulent times in the 1990s. And this second category is made up of all sorts of fears, anxieties, and insecurities as well. And those, I think, tend to get overlooked looking back. Some of these anxieties or fears are, of course, well known. Take, for instance, Margaret Thatcher's fear that Germany, once unified with a former GDR, would yet again become a hegemonic power in Europe, dominating this Central European area. And similar fears were, of course, shared in many other places in Europe. France, obviously, even though the French were a little bit better at hiding those fears from the public than Margaret Thatcher was. But also the European Commission, for instance, in Brussels, was driven by fears and anxieties in the early 1990s. Their fear was that the European community was potentially ending up on and I quote here Jacques Delors, the president of the European Commission, who said behind closed doors that the European community might end up on the rubbish heap of history because its member states might come to the conclusion that a new Europe needed entirely new institutions as well. So what resulted from these from these fears and anxieties was, I would argue, a kind of conservative reflex. Paradoxically, the idea was to speed up European integration, to push forward with European integration in the framework of the existing European community that was then called European Union 1993 following, to, for instance, complete the ambitious project to introduce economic and monetary union, the euro that most of us use nowadays, or to complete the internal market, big ambitious projects, but all within the framework of the existing European community. And the idea was that if European integration was sped up, the European community would become sort of the center of gravity of the new emerging Europe, that the European community would be kind of revitalized. And ultimately, though, the goal was, of course, to preserve a certain Western style of European integration for a very uncertain future. And only then, from this position of strength, the argument ran, new members could be welcomed in the European Union of the future. So I think it was no coincidence that European integration in the framework of the European Union experienced such a tremendous acceleration and push in the early 1990s in exactly at this point in time. To end, of course, I want to kind of pose the question of what role did the Eastern and the Southeastern Europeans or Central Europeans play in this process. And the answer, unfortunately, I think is a relatively marginal role, because in the 1990s, at least in the first half of the 1990s, this process of accelerated European integration was a very self-reflective Western European endeavor. It's, I think, important to keep in mind that until the mid-1990s, the West German government was one of the only governments to wholeheartedly support Eastern enlargement. That was a very, very contested idea, and only a minority of member states were actually in favor until the mid or end, towards the end of the 1990s. So yeah, this would be one of the open questions I would like to pose, is whether this was a bit of a missed chance, that this push for Europe, for the deepening of European integration in the early 1990s was so focused on Western concepts. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you very much. And when I was hearing you, for me it was clear that actually you three were speaking, or I was thinking about this concept of the past futures. It's a concept of Koselleck, a German historian, who was exactly pointing out this, that like people in different periods in the modernity had actually different imaginations of the future, that at the time are futures, but in our perception are like past futures, futures that never realized actually, you know? And it's kind of, so I see that we have already here a person, but I would maybe still want exactly about this past futures. You, Jan, were living in one of these futures of the European Union. So 10 years later, 2009, you began to be member of the European Parliament, I would like to know about your impression of the discussions in Brussels in that time. So how you would describe the relationships between Eastern and Western European politicians in Brussels during these years, and what hopes but also fears, we heard both, you know, were linked with this enlargement that was at the time already took place.
Maybe I'm just adding that there was some kind of an experience which I had before being a member in the European Parliament, as I became politically active in '99, just around the entry into the war in Yugoslavia for also Germany, and therefore I have some kind of experience about how to look at those developments in the 10 years before, also as being active in politics in a network of young Greens, European-wide, also in Eastern and Southern Europe. And I can say this from a perspective of people who entered into this political sphere after the 90s or at the end of the 90s, which already was a change to the 90s, I would say, because there was a generation starting to get politically active with some kind of a blank page at that moment, letting the 90s and everything before behind them, who then realized on their own that there was still such a divergence between the perspectives of each other. Although it was a new generation, like kind of Erasmus generation, looking beyond the borders, there was a realization that, of course, borders and laws or integration is one part of it. The other part is still that there is very diverging histories and cultures, and that this was interesting from a perspective that these young people tried to build up new perspectives beyond that diverging cultures. So European, international, global identities of political activism, for example. But at the same time, that was only one part of that generation and the society. And when I entered the European Parliament, it was already, of course, the new European Union members were already there, but it was kind of the end of the transition period, these 5 years before 2004 to 2009. And there was kind of like a normalization of the political process being an integrated one. On the other side, the perspective still remained very different. For example, when I entered the European Parliament, also the years before, there was the phase where there was the first cabinet of Tusk, and I really think that this was a very decisive moment in this development after the extension of the Western European view to the East, because what happened at that moment, in my view, was that there was a call from not only Poland, but I would say Central Europe in general, which wasn't really answered by Western politicians back then. And I really have the feeling that that's also some kind of a generational difference, because I would say in that generation, which I belong to, a political generation, there was a view to the East and people really said, okay, let's do that, while we didn't recognize at that moment that there was strong resistance or even ignorance still in the generations before. I have to admit many of that I only learn now after February 22, while being in the parliament, also in a situation when we were discussing about the cooperation agreements with Ukraine and also the situation on Crimea and so on. It wasn't so visible back then, this gap also between the generations, as it is right now, I would say. I think there is really a problem that the political generations who were steering us through the 90s and the 2000s were completely still locked in their cultural experience, especially when it's about the Western politicians. But I would say that there is also some kind of necessity to dive deeper in the reasons why, for example, in the 2010 following, or 2007 to 2011, when Tusk was there, why it wasn't possible to really react in the right way to that, and what mistakes have been done also in these years. And just to add one further view to that, one thing which I just can give back also as being a surprise for someone who grew up at defense on the west side. So I knew about the whole differences also of perspectives, but still, when in the European Parliament, I was at a Justice and Home Affairs Council in Riga. I think it was somewhere 2000, could be around 2013. And I was going out of the council meeting, standing at the port in front of an LNG terminal, looking at that with the eyes of a German, not understanding what happened and what is actually taking place. And that was kind of already 2013, where it became obvious to me that Western Europe, and in particular also German politicians back then, did completely not understand and see the situation, for example, of the Baltic countries and of Central Europe as a whole in this geopolitical sense, and also in the question of understanding how important this independence and the strive for freedom was still there, although already having joined the European Union. So I think that becomes obvious right now, but it was already back then, and I think that shows that there was a decade of also misunderstanding still the different perspectives, which now need to be brought in actively when we want to overcome that kind of in-between history after the 90s.
Okay, thank you very much. I was writing down decade of misunderstandings. And we heard a lot of a variety of perspective and of gaze, the Western European looking at Eastern and Europe, and like the other way around. And we have our first two speakers, so please.
They were two different perspectives, satisfaction and dissatisfaction with the European, being part of Europe or the sharing European democracy. Unfortunately, we don't know exactly what happened in politics in the 90s, because technically, historians make the object of his investigation is event when at least 70 years passed from the event, because we don't have access to the archives, and we actually, in this case, we don't know exactly what happened in politics in the 90s. But in this case, do you think you believe that what happened in the 90s, so coined by the Huntington, for example, as a third wave of democracy, it was real democracy, what happened in the 90s in politics with the persons we call the political elite, which were connected with the communist, or they have a communist experience and past. What happened with this political elite? Because we know that a Communist Party had a quite huge wealth and property in the countries. And it was a unity between the party and state government. And what happened with the property, and what happened with this wealth, and where this politics right now, and what role they played in the politics 90s? Because we know that, for example, Bulgarian Communist Party renamed Socialist Party and came to power. We know what happened in the former Soviet Union. And in this case, many people who had very deep communist experience held power for more than 20 years, and they have all power to destroy what our archives have. So it means that, well, we have a high technology communication, but it doesn't mean that we can get primary sources to understand really what happened in 90s in the Eastern European countries, in the former Soviet Union, how they transferred power, and if they were really democratic transformation.
May I short answer to that directly?
Yes,
yeah,
absolutely.
Because from I'm doing research on the 90s and in Central Europe it's 30 years. Normally this so-called time after which you can access state archives in Poland and East Central Europe everywhere you have 30 years. So simply we start to have now. You can calculate. So we have access until 1994 something like that now, and it's possible actually to have a look at that. Of course, it's always relates. It's depends on whether the state, state budget gives enough resources to the state archive system, so they are able to work with the. You are able to work with the documents. But generally, in most countries, I think in Central Europe, I don't know actually in Southeast Eastern Europe, but in East Central Europe, you should be able to do historical research on the 90s right now on, and maybe also to the second part what happened with the communists. I mean, maybe Poland is a little bit untypical example there because in Poland, as I told you, there has been a quite strong counter elite. Tadeusz Mazowiecki is one of the most important representatives who even went then to former Yugoslavia and as a special rapporteur or something for United Nations. And of course, these Solidarność elites they did a compromise with the communists, which was later on then and is still much debated in Poland and criticized from the right wing side of the political spectrum mainly. But there was quite a lot of I would say publicity and control on how property transformations took place. And actually, this is interesting because this is why Poland, which is normally seen as a model case of liberal transformation, had one of the slowest property transformations. So one of the slowest privatization processes in whole Eastern Europe, and quite on the contrary, if you look at Czech Republic, for example, where they did a very quick privatization with coupon privatization with Václav Klaus, pretty much pushing that. But even more in the post-Soviet region, in Russia, in Ukraine, where they had very liberal, very quick privatizations. They gave away public property on the basis of vouchers to the population, and then of course, the former communists, not because they had been communists, but because they had good connections. They knew the state-owned bankers and so on. They were able to get all this property and you have these oligarchs. You have them in Czech Republic. Look at Andrej Babiš and others. You have them in Russia, of course. They have been controlled now by Putin. You have them in Ukraine, but you don't have them, for example, in Poland. There you see that this. If you have a strong counter-elite, strong civil society, I would say, and if you take more time for privatizing, not doing it as quick as possible, also as in Eastern Germany has been done, take your time and control the process. This is pretty important for building long-time stability, I would say. And I mean, of course, Poland, there is problems with democracy and the rule of law has been problems also in Poland, but there are no oligarchs in any case. There's no mixture or conjunction of political and economic power, so to speak. Yeah, maybe. So sorry for being longer than I wanted, but just as a direct.
I wanted to ask if someone else wants to add on this.
Just a very, very quick note for maybe the younger researchers in this room who are looking to do research on these transformation processes. Also maybe from a Western perspective, the Western archives are also open, and in some countries as the UK, the retention period is now down to 20 years. So the whole of the 1990s state archive records are accessible.
It's only a general remark to say the approach concerning how to deal with Eastern Europe. I took part in the drafting of the so-called cooperation agreements and plays a certain role even nowadays concerning Ukraine. Ukraine was, for us, the Europeans, a fantastic negotiator, and cynically they said, it's easy to deal with us because our experts are still in Moscow. And what was very unpleasant for us being in Brussels and to negotiating these treaties, that in brackets we were not allowed to initial and then to ratify faster than the agreement we had more or less agreed upon, but later on with Russia. That's one general remark. The other remark is that certain West European countries were interested in integrating partially what is the East into, but with a certain perspective, free trade. Great Britain was totally opposed to deepening certain structures. And I think what the huge mistake, and there was there was probably not unity among ourselves, that say that we had to prepare ourselves. We came over then with what you said, and that was totally counterproductive. We had inside our government all the time the dispute, you know better, let's say with, for example, free movement of labor. And that was, for example, as Poland is concerned, was a huge mistake, psychologically was a huge mistake, because it didn't create so much difficulties. And then again, a general remark that countries like Poland were extremely upset that we, for example, I was then later on in Ukraine, that when we talked about enlargement and so on, we tried all the time to agree about certain aspects with Russia, European Union and Russia, over what is Central European governments, and they were very much upset. That was a similar process a long time ago when Germany concluded the agreements in 70, let's say, with Russia and so on. That we forgot about what's the role and the function the Central European government should play. But you are far more expert and you should comment that.
Yeah, thank you very much. You can also, okay, someone want to react on this?
It's going the same line.
If no one wants to react, please.
Yeah, so thank you very much, Mr. Schmidt, who was in the role of ambassador, and I was in the role only of a member of the European Parliament, but I would say even to explain why I maybe had a very different view of my political generation than Jan has said now, is that I've been in the presidency of the Greens in the 80s, and that means I was, as a 68 generation, like some of the founders of the Greens in Europe, I was very clearly 100% of the side of Charter 77, and then later Memorial and Solidarność, and so I had a history of 20 years supporting the Eastern European and Russian democratic opposition when I had to enter the historic situation and suddenly had a certain responsibility. I thank you all. It's all very interesting for me to look on my own decisions and what I remember by the point of youngers and historians. But I think there should be an even more pluralistic view, and so I'm happy that you named the governments at least by specific representatives. I think that is necessary, and I think it's necessary to include, like with Jan, now the parliament. But what I'm missing is there has been part of what you say has been not intelligent decisions enough related to deindustrialization and economic and social problems. Part of it is that we have not only different nations, but so we have to include then, we had at least, 12 or 16 or 27 different nations. You have to go into that and what their history is with Eastern Europe and with the Soviet Union. And then you have to go into the different political parties. And maybe it's new for you, but I was the only Green of the German Greens who was for German unification and as quick as possible, and who was for reintegration and reunification of Europe as quick as possible. And I was the only German Green in the parliament who was for military intervention to liberate Sarajevo. So we couldn't know one another at that time because I had death threats from Milosevic. And I tried to come to Sarajevo, but there Susan Sontag got the flight one day before me, and maybe happily I didn't get the flight because I didn't know. So I would add a little bit of your mourning, which I can feel fully. You remind me my feelings in the 90s, but I must say we have been a minority in the European Parliament with Alexander Langer, he in a way died one day before of Srebrenica because he and I and a Dutch member, I have to look, I think we have been only 3 who really have been committed these years to stop massacres, rape, concentration camps and all that. And I gave a speech at Sorbonne. I was invited by the French. I never could have done that speech in Germany. That's interesting. That Sorbonne invited me to give a speech. And I said the same like you. Europe is losing its soul with this violence and, how to say it, Yes, I called it, I didn't call it genocide, I'm a little bit more, but with this new war and rape and new concentration camps in Bosnia. And we did something, we supported Oslo Bodonje, I don't know if you all know it, that was a newspaper in Sarajevo, and they have been bombed and so on. So we tried little steps, you see, and that we should go into debate. What is the decision-making power of a government, of the European Commission, of the Parliament? And then you, I think, have to be a little bit more, how to say, realistic. We should demand enough from democracy, you are right, we should demand enough from Europe, but then really you have to look into what could a member of European Parliament like me do at that time? What could I achieve? What could Genscher achieve? What could Mitterrand achieve? And I must say, the same debate between the governments we had in the Parliament. So the French Greens looked at me and said to me into my eyes, and we have been Greens, Eva, do you not think there's with German reunification, German gets too powerful? That was the same position like from Thatcher and from Mitterrand. He was doing it a little bit more softly. So, and then I had the feeling that many of my colleagues, nice colleagues, they didn't know Eastern Europe. You see, they didn't know Eastern Europe. They were only committed that the southern countries, and that's interesting what they did then for the southern Eastern Europe, but it were the French, the Italian, and the Greek. They thought, oh, now the North is getting too much, even more power within Europe. So, but I don't know if they included Southern Europe better than the North. I don't think so, because they said we are the South, but they meant Portugal, Spain, France, Italy, and Greece. You see that? So there are a lot of problems, and what I liked very much with you beginning of the talk, because I'm thinking about now a lot, what could have been done better, what could I have networked better, who is carrying the debt and the mistakes and so on, that you said it was a very special historic time, and by many reasons, by global economy, by global finance, by global media, by different generations, and different political parties and their conflicts. It was the quickest time, the most accelerated moment of history I remembered. Now I have the feeling we are being in the same new accelerating time between Trump, Putin, Xi Jinping, and so on. But I think so you should be a little bit more, not soft, but think about it at least in the decision making. You see, if Germany would have done it more slowly, you see, then maybe less social problems. But you see, the political decisions, we are democracy, you have to decide, should we do a referendum? A referendum would mean more months, and then maybe unification would not have been possible anymore.
Thank you very much for this, like, more variety and more actors, and I like very much this panel of this mix of historical and testimony of the time.
Better,
huh?
And gender balance.
Balance is getting better and better. That's also very important. Someone want to react directly to this?
If I may, yeah?
Yeah, sure.
Yeah, I would like to. Thanks a lot for that insight, and also for your insider perspective, of course. I mean, I hope, of course, I was asked to present Polish perspectives here, and so I should ask now, as a historian, of course, I mean, I see that there were certain limitations, and there always are limitations, and as much as I really understand and your point that about how painful this ignorance can be and was actually. We always also should keep in mind, I think Steffen Mau, the German sociologist, said that lately, empathy is a limited resource, unfortunately. People are, in a democracy, people are inclined to think about their own interests, and that is not something you can't blame them for that, yeah? You know, and I mean, we have these debates in any European country. There's always a pretty different approach. If we think about the migration crisis, do we give out social support to our people or to foreigners and so on? And I think if we compare, actually, that's why it's so interesting to compare this German reunification with the broader European context that took place, because I mean, Western Germans, they felt quite a lot of empathy. I mean, Kohl, he was ready to sacrifice a lot of millions and billions of Deutschmarks in order to integrate Eastern Germany, no matter what, as quick as possible, with really high economic costs, with, of course, good political results for himself, which is also legitimate, I would say, in an electoral democracy. He, of course, thought about the voters in Eastern Germany. Many of them became, for a long time, until now, actually, they became voters of CDU then. Until now, they are, many of them, changing to AfD recently. But this is how, of course, politics takes place. And I would take the example of Poland again here, because as much as Poland also in the 90s and many other Eastern Europeans felt this ignorance of the Westerners and always was keen to get more acceptance, also on a symbolic level. The picture is less clear if it comes to the question whether Poland is ready to accept migrants, for example. And it is less clear now if we are talking about the situation in Ukraine. And Poland, we have Andrei Portnov yesterday talked about that, about the big numbers of Ukrainians coming into Poland. This is, of course, there is a lot of support from Polish civil society, which is doing a really great job there, because the state has been doing less than the German state, actually, for these Ukrainian migrants. But as you also see, there's also a quite big part of Polish society who is pretty much now, after a year or two, starting to campaign against Ukrainians, Ukrainian farmers, and so on. So solidarity and empathy, they are limited resources. And of course, this is no excuse, so to speak, for not to make wise policy. But I'm quite aware as a historian that we need to take this into account, and I hope I'm not an easy judge, yeah, so to speak, because that's not my role as a historian.
I also just wanted to respond to you very quickly. Thank you for a very rich contribution to our discussion. I just wanted to pick one of the points you made and come back to the Yugoslav wars and the reaction to it in the West. And I just wanted to add that also from a government perspective, I've seen the files. The lack of a effective reaction of the European Union, or the inability of the European Union to stop the war in Yugoslavia, was felt as a defeat. And was also for Helmut Kohl, for instance, the Yugoslav war was the #1 reason why the European Union should have a single foreign policy, and that there was that majority voting in the Council was very much needed to kind of overcome these shortcomings. And so there was also a lot of empathy, I would say, but just this feeling of powerlessness. And that was, shared also, I think, by most of the governments in power, but of course didn't make the situation better in Yugoslavia.
Okay, thank you. I'm going to contribute with this kind of the task of plurality, and I'm going to bring the Georgian case right now into the task and somehow stretch the Europe toward this kind of south from the Central and Eastern Europe. So I think right now the idea of Europe is nowhere as much contested as it is in Georgia. And there is also, we're on this kind of verge of turning towards Russia or staying on the same track. And it has been 30 years right now. I'm exactly 30 years old, so it was the 90s that the country got the independence. And since then I remember the idea of Europe being some kind of the light at the end of the tunnel, right? That we're gonna somehow get there, but there were so many conditions, so many problems. And then, I don't know if you know the Georgian case, but it was some kind of experiment in the sense that from the West kind of American US powers to somehow nurture and facilitate the Western democratic kind of forces, so this kind of neoliberalization and this kind of very prompt deindustrialization and the privatization was also the case in Georgia. And right now we're in this situation where there is like the government is trying to increase the Euroscepticism, showing that Europe has betrayed us, that their kind of condition on the joining EU was quite strict and like quite belated. They were not on time. But on the other hand, there is still some kind of a huge kind of optimism towards Europe. And itself, the idea of Europe is under this kind of going the change, right? Even in the Europe. So it's like very hard to capture what kind of concept right now the Georgian society is trying to somehow grasp, like the progressive one and the illiberal one. So it's like so many different ideas about Europe, right? But I would like to ask you, as the persons who are looking from this kind of prosperity, like from this kind of future, you know, back to the, what would be your kind of suggestions? I mean, you probably know more or less the situation, political situation in Georgia. Its location, its history more or less, but also its strive to the European kind of family, right? And there is a lot of discussions, critical ones in the leftist groups, for example, in the green groups in Georgia, about Europe. But I think there is a widely shared consensus that this is the only alternative we can kind of chase, because there is a Russia and there is a China, and none of these powers are some kind of, I don't know, like the examples of the future. So the only future there is the future of the Europe, but the governments are also somehow playing with the future of Ukraine, you know, the one who wanted to become the part of the NATO and become the victim of the war. The oppositional parties, on the other hand, are playing with the future of the Belarus. If we somehow stay with the government, then we're gonna become the Belarus with this Belarusization and the authoritarian regime. So and then there is this concept of Europe, which is also very hard to grasp and capture. So this is what I would like to ask you to discuss. Thanks.
If I can just return, mentioning empathy, for example, I mentioned Susan Sontag. She was trying to remind the people about the role of intellectuals in societies, and I think that one of the huge problems is that today, probably less than ever, we have a politics which doesn't communicate with their intellectuals and the people who were, for example, in case of Bosnia, much more aware about the things, what is going on, trying to remind on something which obviously seems a utopistic thing, you know, even I would believe it's a normal that we wish to live in the societies where we will not watch on the daily basis killing of children. I think it's the normal request, you know. But obviously we live in the societies where these things wish to be established as something which is just the reality. So I just wish to remind that we should be aware, it's when we speak, you know, like we don't listen historians about the things when we discuss about the future. Georgians, you know, like from perspective of what happened to Macedonia, you know, it's huge betrayal, you know, you put the people in really difficult conditions, you know, to sacrifice them, and you left them, you know, like to have the right-wing parties back, you know, putting them in really bad situation. It's the political Europe, you know, like it's difficult to trust them, you know, very much. But for me, the thing which I thought that we are talking about is idea of Europe. What is the idea of Europe? And I wish to remind the people that, you know, like, that some people believe that Europe is about diversity. You mentioned Ukrainians and the problem when they come to Poland. Let's come with the subject. What is about the Muslims coming to Europe? We didn't have any reaction to people listening, the journalists who is telling these people which are coming from Ukraine, they are okay, they are white, you know, like they are Christians, you know. which means that some people are not welcome in Europe at all. So is that Europe that we are talking about? Because, for example, for the Bosnians, where we have a Muslim majority, you know, like we forgot that story about Turkey as a part of European Union, because they are, I guess, enemy. I don't follow that much, but I don't listen to that story. But I know that I remember as a kid that they were talking about Turkey being why because they are dictators, or you know, because they are much worse than some countries of the Eastern Bloc, which doesn't look also very, you know, like the countries that I would enjoy their human rights, for example. So did we accept hypocrisy as the language? Is it, because I just think that the great thing would be that we finally get idea what the Europe, because many people are very much confused with that, you know, like there is idea, for that reason I'm mentioning the importance of intellectuals. The intellectual story about Europe is beautiful. The Europe we see on everyday basis doesn't look good at all. It's not about, you know, the fact that you are better than North Korea is not, you know, impressive. Because, you know, we expect fully rights, you know, like that was the idea where people expected to feel free, to have a freedom of speech, you know. At this moment, for some subjects in Bosnia, I have bigger freedom of speech than Germans today. So it's you know, like very fluid thing. So I would like, you know, like, it's bad when you force countries like Bosnia, you know, like we don't have any other, like Georgians, we don't have any other option than to be member of Europe, you know, because what is the other option, you know? But to become part of an idea because we believe in that, it's something totally different. So returning to point, I thought when we talk about the things here that we talk about idea because reality is obvious, you know. So maybe some people enjoy this in country like this, you know, like I like to come to Berlin. Berlin was a great city always, you know. I like European cities, but the political thing in Europe doesn't look good at all.
May I defend, maybe not the idea of Europe, but some part of the political reality I would like to defend, actually, because I think we need to be fair. And if you look at East Central Europe and these countries which access the European Union in 24, it's exactly 20 years now. In May 2024. The East Central European countries accessed the European Union, and after long, you know that better than me, I guess. After long and hard accession negotiations, and they really had to work hard to implement this acquis communautaire. But they received something in return, I would say. They received really, I mean, you only have to go to Poland now. It's 80 kilometers from Berlin. Remember how it looked like 20 years ago. I do remember how it looked like, and you couldn't easily go there because there was no Schengen. You had to wait at the border for hours, yeah, as you are still do outside the Schengen area often. And I mean, it's really I have ironically quoted that. I mean, there is a historian, an economist writing about Poland being Europeans' growth champion, and they have they had half or less than, I think, less than half of the GDP than Germany in 1989, and now they have 2/3 of Germany. Yeah, so you have to, and people are far better off. They live in a more democratic society, and this is not only the case of Poland. This is the case of many other East Central European countries. And I think we shouldn't dismiss these successes too easily, because we are of course, if you compare the reality of Europe to some utopian idea of Europe, the reality will always be like muddy and I don't know, not so great. But quoting one public intellectual, one historic colleague of mine, Timothy Snyder, he always likes to talk about Europe as the place to be after imperialism. And this would be also my answer to our Georgian friend. I don't know where she is now. There, yeah. I mean, I mean, Europe is not, maybe Europe is not so much a light at the end of the tunnel, because Europe is not a bright place, not the only bright place. It's not a bright idea. It's a very complicated reality with much struggles for interests and so on. But in the end, it's the alternative to imperialism, because we live in a world where imperialism is going on and expanding in Russia. In other imperialisms has been named, and we can also have a look at the United States and what will happen there. I'm not so sure whether this will be a brighter alternative in the near future. So there is nothing else than Europe that remains, actually, and I think we should work. We should not easily dismiss what we have already achieved together. All the mistakes and problems I do not negate them. I have pointed them out in my input in the beginning myself. All this taken, but this is still a story which should not be dismissed, and which I hope should continue, including Georgia and including Ukraine, and including, of course, Macedonia, which is or Northern Macedonia, which is the hardest case of really, betrayal in a way, because I think they have met all the criteria for years now, and only Bulgaria, simply because of nationalist language question, is blocking the accession. This is, of course, a big problem, but still, I mean, you see, Bulgaria has also a nation. The European Union is not an imperium. Brussels cannot dictate Bulgaria. You have to accept this now. They have their voice, and we have to find a compromise and a solution to that. This is hard. This is hard work, and we are at a political foundation here, and politics is about doing this hard work, I would say. So go ahead.
Just to say that I agree, of course, but just to understand the position, I speak from the position of the person who doesn't live in the European Union, and I'm glad I'm telling from the position of the country which was victim of the European inability to solve the slaughter, So it's really, it's very serious thing. And returning to, I would say, a foreign policy of Europe. Let's say I talk more about it, like the fact that after that war, which you call it, former Yugoslavia, it's important, it's Croatia, Bosnia, Serbia, whatever, like the country which enters European Union is a Croatia, For me, it's very interesting why it's not Bosnia, because it's very important, it's essential thing. If you, after the war, you accept some country, will European Union accept the Serbia before the Bosnia in Europe? It's also it would be even more interesting. For me, the fact that one of those countries manage criteria, whatever it is, like to become the member of European Bosnia while we left the Bosnia, I just find it, like something that make us very, I'm talking about our perspectives, like we don't. Like it doesn't look good. So let's say that I agree, of course, that it is better in Bulgaria today or Romania than 30 years ago. But the reality I'm talking about is the foreign policy from the perspective of someone who is not member of European Union.
Yeah, and surely it's like a long story of Europe. Always this question of Europe as a political project, as an idea, and how is there things like coming together or not. I will want to invite
I will try to be as quickly as I can, because we already ran out of the time. So I here to bring...
You have time until 12.
Oh, so okay. Then I will talk more. So I'm here to bring perspective from Ukraine, as I think they share a lot of concerns, like in Eastern Europe and post-Soviet country. And I wanted to remind that for us, it's also like the idea of Europe is some kind of point of self-identification. And our second president, he wrote a book which named Ukraine is not Russia. And this is kind of so silly that after even 10-something years after our independence, we still needed to remind everybody else around the world that Ukraine is not Russia. And actually, the funny thing, traveling here, I was reading a book, and there was a quote from another book that, what is a Europe? Europe is not a Russia. So I think that for us, Europe is, like some kind of like antipode to the Russia, which was by which we were colonized for the centuries. And also another important point for Ukraine is that we were divided by two even more different empires at different times. So part of Ukraine was occupied by Russia for centuries, and now the part it was Austria-Hungary, Poland, etc. So we have, let's say, inside the country, we have some quite diversity. We're not like heterogeneous, homogeneous in the end. But still for us, Europe is kind of the idea of Europe is kind of the point to identify ourselves, and they identify ourselves as European, and we really want to be a part of European Union, and now we're actually fighting for that right, physically. So I think that this is important, and yeah, maybe in case with Yugoslavia, like it's quite different, yeah. Now, especially, I mean, how it's seen from Ukraine, because Russia we were always under the influence of Russia, unfortunately. It's just huge country. And after collapse of Soviet Union, because of like really close economic ties, we didn't have a lot of choice, to stand up and, I don't know, to try to do something like Poland succeeded to do. And as you said about when you crossing the border from Germany to Poland, you see how Poland changed a lot. So now if you want to see this change, you can come to Ukraine and come to Poland and, just a few kilometers and you see what is EU and what is not being a member of EU. So I think that for us, Europe is the future, and this is the only, the only option we have.
Yeah, sure, please.
I'd just like to jump in on that and the point before, because also with the intervention of being critical about the inability or inabilities of Europe. I also would really agree on the point that maybe sometimes, and in some regards, we put the European idea on a level of being an ideal and of being also a vision, which is great, but which is not applicable to reality. I mean, and it is visible now more than before that the European Union in the geopolitical landscape is, of course, not able to tackle all the problems on its own. Some of the problems Europe has to be realistic and understand it can't solve at all alone. We are dependent to other actors in the world. Let it be climate change, let it be some security concerns, let it be economic delivery chain aspects, etc. We are dependent. So like this inabilities, they will remain to be there. So we shouldn't promise everyone that they are not there. So it's also to be realistic on what Europe can deliver, because also otherwise we will always be disappointed by Europe, and that's exactly what's happening right now. There is an inwards turning, not only in Europe, everywhere in the world. There's an inwards turning because of the loss of hope in the possibility to deliver on a supranational, international level to solve problems. So let's just concentrate on our own interest, not be empathic anymore, not have empathy anymore, but turn inwards back to our own interest. And that in a moment where, looking at Georgia, for example, it would be purely needed that we understand, of course, we shouldn't turn inwards now, when we should be there, you know, and but that's exactly the problematic, and also on the Balkan, of course, we should be there rather than turning inwards at the moment, and so that's the tensionous moment where the inner thinking of the European Union inner life is dominated by a tendency to turn inwards to solve their own problems, to get safeguarded what we still have as sovereignty, and to not understand, of course, that the solution in the long term lies in being outwards going and going to fight for, looking at Ukraine, for our interest in a long-term thinking. So that's the tendency. I just wanted to throw that in, because if we just always remind us of the ideal, maybe that turns us away of fixing the problems which we have right now and getting forward, because we just lose hope to anywhere get there.
Can I jump right? Yeah, just as a quick response to what you just said, I think that up in the end we will still need a vision, and we still need ideas, because these extraordinary high expectations that people have of the European Union are also a part of its strength. I think they also, because this is what the EU sets apart from other international organizations, that people actually expect something from it. And that has also been a driver for change, you know. And if we completely lose sight of where we want to go with this project, then maybe the really hard-fought breakthroughs in negotiations will never happen. So I think we need both. We need to be realistic and pragmatic and solve the problems of every day. But at the same time, somehow we still need to have a direction, or a sense of direction where we're going. But that is, of course, extremely hard, because we're 27 member states, and who says where we're supposed to go? So this is also a very, very, very hard discussion we're having.
Please.
Yeah, thank you very much. I'd like to ask a question which relates, more to the title of this section, actually, to the imagination of Europe in the 1990s, and there also more to the first two points, ideas and spaces, went to politics, although politics, of course, have their role. And this question is, what were the imaginations of the margins of Europe by political and intellectual elites in the 1990s? Because as we see in the early 1990s, Balkans, Yugoslavia seemingly did not really belong to Europe. What the question is about countries like Belarus, Ukraine, Georgia, which we already mentioned. And if we look at the countries which were part of the enlargement, they were basically the countries which existed before the Second World War. And those who were not existing before the Second World War, where have they been in the imagination of European elites? I mean, and there's also a point we already had in this discussion. So today we are discussing the idea that Ukraine is defending the European security order. On the other hand, we heard that all these discussions, debates, and talks with Ukraine, for instance, were very much focused on the idea that there's a certain zone of influence, which is, of course, Russian influence in that area. So how were the ideas in the 90s, and how did they influence also the politics of the 2000s up to now? For instance, if we look at the pro-European revolutions in Ukraine, where we saw several in Georgia, and at least the trials to have such a revolution in Belarus. Thanks.
Someone want? Please.
Just, I mean, because now it turned that we talk about the imagination of Europe in 90s. So now we are talking about some, I'm sorry that I sounds like the negative guy. As I said, you know, like the thing is, Europe is we believed in that, you know, like that was, and I'm telling these things because at that moment when we believed in 90s what the Europe should be, we thought about the human rights and about very basic thing, about the hope that it's not possible in Europe, as they spoke, like there will not be a war about European nations. We were not member as the European state, but we hope that it is not okay, because in 45 they said never again. We hope the genocide will not be permissible in Europe. So these are things not very abstract, you know. These are the things, if we talk about imagination of Europe of 90s, the fact that Polish people, Romanian people live better, I appreciate, I'm very glad about. But I just wish to say that this thing that we eat more, that we sleep more, that we work more, are not the stories about imagination. It's about, you know, to feel that you feel better in that, you know, like some basic human things. I thought that we speak about a little bit more sophisticated things. I will just remind you, Jacques Delors, Hans van den Broek, Jacques Center, they came to Yugoslavia before the war in Belgrade, proposing, you know, for Yugoslavia to enter European Union, you know, like they offered 5 billion. It didn't succeed, but returning to it, at that moment we thought that Europe is that nice space where you can feel safe. I'm just telling, from that idea, just in 92, we had massacres in the Bosnian cities about the Serbian army entry and the paramilitary force entering Bijeljina, Zvornik, that are the cities towns in Bosnia, Visegrad, massacring people, putting them in concentration camps in Prijedor, in Omarska, in Trnopolje, you know, like. Then we had Croatians, which had a very huge support from German politics at that moment, opening concentration camps there. So I'm telling, if in relation to subject we have, I'm repeating, maybe I sound negative. I'm not even that Eurosceptic or whatever. I mean, I'm European by the fact that I'm from Bosnia. So I'm not proving that I'm European, you know, but telling that idea of Europe is different. An idea from Bosnian idea about Europe is something which is better for Europe. I will remind you about the thing that, for example, French intellectuals formed the even political party in 90s supporting Bosnia. It was a huge group of intellectuals because, sorry, just a second. So there was a group of the people who organized the political party which was called European Stars in Sarajevo. They tried to explain to Mitterrand. They were pushing Mitterrand to come in Sarajevo. Mitterrand was the first socialist president in France. He came, of course, he didn't do anything. So those people were telling that this idea about the Europe, like very open space and everything, that it failed, that after that disaster in Bosnia, that we have right-wing parties empowering. So we believe that it's consequence of this politics towards Bosnia, that it encouraged right-wing parties. We believe that right-wing parties are dangerous. I don't know what people here think, but we think that they are very dangerous because our experience with them is dramatically bad. So we are not politically, I'm not politically correct to say, you know, like they are dangerous. And we say that they are a reflection of European failure in Bosnia, because we talk about 90s. So returning to that, I just wish to remind that things could be better beside the fact that people live better their daily lives.
I'm sorry to step...
Not huge, just to say, it's not huge expectation not to expect genocide. You know, that's not, I don't believe it's a huge expectation from the...
Sorry. To intervene, you have to enter. To intervene, you have to enter in the circle. So, sorry. No, I'm sorry. I'm sorry. We continue here the discussion here in the circle, and we have 10 minutes left. So I would really like to give first the word to the two persons that are here in the circle, and then to give you all the possibility to make a final statement.
So. My name is Mark Laszlo Herbert. I'm an archivist at the Open Society Archives in Budapest at Central European University. And I think, since we're talking about the 1990s, and I was a high school student in the 1990s, it's a good moment for self-reflection. But I would probably say, when I think about how I thought back then about the European Union, I would probably share what many people shared here, so I don't want to bore you with that. But it's also a good moment to look at what happened to Hungary and to maybe just bring that into the discussion. Hungary was a front runner, forerunner until some time. And Viktor Orban is a product of the 1990s, at least his political career. So I pass my chair to you. So yeah, I would just like to include that into the discussion. I don't have much to add to it. Last night we listened to this wonderful Georgian author talking about her own country and how 4 months ago she could not imagine what's happening. So we've been living in that for the past 14 years. Is there anything the panelists would like to add to that?
I'm Nuria Fatihova from Dialog Bureau for Civil Society Cooperation in Vienna. So I'm listening, and in this discussion always, or I'm heard the word Europe, and I just look for definition of this. And for me, there is two concepts of. So there is concept of Europe and concept of European Union. We're using always the concept of Europe, and I prefer the geographical definition of Europe, and which included Caucasia, sure Balkans, and huge part of Russia. And there is also cultural definitions of Europe too. For me, it's more problematic because we can identify, so have identification with Europe, and it can be some like fantasy, imagine, and based on some discriminations discourse. For example, they can say Europe, it's Christianity, and it is not so. Yeah, and it's like deeply discrimination. So. Believing. Because of this, I prefer concept of European Union, Europe has a dark sides you mentioned today, and because of this, I prefer the concept of European Union. And what I wanted to say, this concept started try to go away from the wars, what permanently was in European in Europe, in this west part of Europe, and this concept is based on post-nationalist space, and I just one sentence. I think we should think more if we're talking about how it can exist. So I think in 90s imagination about European Union was still based on this concept. Okay, so we have new members, and these new members we have new rules, and we should go away from this nationalistic understanding who we are. And now, unfortunately, we see inside the European Union absolute other trend, and people going away from this concept. And it's important for me, I think, I wanted to mention, we should, I don't know how to bring to this first idea of European Union, how it's possible to came to this idea back, how on level of politician and intellectual. And in this last sentence, I think I'm happy if expansion of European Union is going more and more. In European Union will have more members, but it should be done based of this great idea. So expansion of the space of peace. Yeah, and sorry, thank you.
Okay, so we have our last 5 minutes. We have also a Hungarian perspective here, the question of European Union. I just give you the word. He wants to begin for a final statement to the new topics, to what has been said until now. Who wants to? Please.
I can start with a final round. Just a quick comment on Hungary. I totally agree that Hungary was kind of the poster child of Eastern enlargement, and that in the late 1980s and early 1990s, I think Hans-Dietrich Genscher, the foreign minister, was nowhere more often than in Budapest. There was even one year where he was more often in Budapest than he was in Paris, and everyone was very skeptical about that. So definitely high expectations, and then fast forward to today, what happened and what went wrong? And that's a question I cannot answer, but I can confirm that also in the West there were very high expectations about the process of integrating Hungary into the European Union, and Hungary being essentially,
Just a note, the funny thing is that support for the European Union and support for European Union membership has declined somewhat, but it's still in the majority.
Yeah. And then maybe one final remark to you. It is true that the European integration project in the 1950s and 60s had a very also at least anti-nationalist rhetoric, or that was one of the kind of core principles it was founded on, and that has maybe is a bit lost in the current discourse. This idea of overcoming nationalism through supranational integration, that was one of the core principles of integration in the 50s and 60s. And I agree that maybe this is something that we should focus on more. But especially the East Central European countries who came into the European Union in the early 2000s were very keen on keeping also their national identity, because they only just recovered it from Soviet domination. So this is, again, another one of these ambiguities, ambivalences. Yeah.
Okay. So I would like to relate to at first to the question on the imaginations of the margins of Europe, actually, because we have heard already from Victor some keywords at least about these great ideas about common European home, for example, as proposed by Gorbachev or Mitterrand also, and also Genscher. They were pretty much in favor of some security, common collective security solution, including Russia, including the Soviet Union, 90 and 3rd of October, by including Eastern Germany, the former GDR, into Western Germany, and including it into NATO. And therefore, this was the prejudice already, which was always then for the East Central European states like Poland and Hungary, Czech Republic, Slovakia. This was the case they always pointed at in order to push the Americans to expand NATO also to Warsaw and to Budapest. So there was this. And of course, Germany was the one who profiting from this experience, because German unification would not have been possible this quickly without this massive support by the United States against. You have also talked about that, against French, British skepticism, so to speak, and pretty much skepticism all around in Europe, I would say so. And Germany actually profited by playing this game together with the United States. And the consequence was, of course, well, we had NATO in the center of Europe, and the European Union, or Western European Union, or any European-based security solutions were pretty much dismissed in this as wild imaginations, as you called them before. Yeah. So this is also I think a very important margin of imagination, or limit of imagination in the time we should mention, which of course has consequences until today. Has also had severe consequences on the capability of European institutions to react in a military way to the genocide taking place in Bosnia, of course. Yeah, because there was no European institution which could have done this, actually. And the Americans were needed for that, simply. Yeah. So, and one last word maybe to Viktor Orban, very shortly. I'm not a very, very big expert on Hungarian politics and economics in the 1990s, but of course, what was striking that Viktor Orban back then, he started as a neoliberal. Yeah, he was a neoliberal, and he was really in the mainstream of what happened then, supporting this quick privatization. And Hungary, exactly as you said, was a poster child of rapid privatization, giving away people's property to, or selling in that case, not giving away by vouchers as the Czechs did and the Russians did, but giving it, selling it to Western corporations. And Viktor Orban, as far as I know, built his political platform actually in a response to this purported sellout of the nation to the West, yeah? And by also profiting, of course, with local businessmen who were like profiting from the economic rising. But we should actually, this example is for me pretty instructive, because it shows that we should not take political freedom as the same as economic freedom. Because maybe this was the biggest mistake actually made in 1989 and in the 90s, that people most people in Europe, in the Western Europe, thought, in America as well, in Northern America, thought that democracy and capitalism is something that would be linked naturally, automatically. And we now see in China, in Russia, that this is simply not true. And capitalism and this neoliberal variant of capitalism, rapidly introduced in East Central Europe, has really, and not only there, but in many other cases, has actually undermined the basis which would have been necessary for building stable democracy. So this is not the economic freedom and the freedom of trade is not two sides of the same coin, so to speak, but are different, are of course legitimate aims and legitimate goals, each for themselves, but they should not be mixed up. And I think the example of the transformation of East Central Europe is quite instructive in that respect. Thanks.
Okay. So yeah, please, we are running out of time, so I would really ask you to be brief.
I'm just trying now to be like the positive, which is difficult because we talk about 90s. So I just, like I would say, I remember I was in the classroom, one professor of history, that was when she came and when she said that Berlin's wall is broken, and she was a communist, and she said, Eastern Germans will regret this decision. And I thought that she's totally crazy, like no doubt. Now I hope that she was crazy. So the thing is, hoping that Bosnia will become the member of European Union, I would really love personally to live in the space where ideas, political ideas, which are about the human rights, about these diversities which are mentioned. I hear that diversity should be something which is important, So I hope, that once we will experience that, but reminding that these things which happened in Bosnia in the 90s, that was try of the people to defend an idea of Europe that, that we hope that we will see in the future. And the second thing, thinking about becoming European in this political sense, because I am, as a Bosnian, for example, for me, I'm pretty much sure that I will be a citizen of European Union who will be very much aware about the crimes that we did in history through colonialism, reminding Europeans, that we did a lot of bad things, So if you ever let the Bosnia, if they ever let the Bosnia to become the European Union member, I'm pretty much sure that many Bosnians, I hope many Bosnians will be people who will remind us, that, colonialism is still not over, that we should fight against that the rights, that Europe has an important role in the world politics, spreading ideas which should be, more civilized than they are today. So I hope that we will not, or now or in the future, that we will not have doubts like what the genocide is, because Bosnians knows very well when you experience the genocide and people denying it, that it is very painful, because now we live with our neighbors who don't have a lot of reasons to believe in any kind of future, and especially not in a future that we try to talk about today.
I'm very thankful for the panel, and I learn a lot, and that's really great. I just still wanted to now react for a minute on this case. Just by telling about my moment entering the Green Party here in Germany. I entered the Green Party in Germany, who were in government with Joschka Fischer as the one who decided in the end about the entry into the bombing with NATO. Exactly in that moment, also because this party was completely split and discussing it heartfully. And I can tell you, I was back then absolutely in favor of military intervention. After all these discussions, which I lived through, many of this party didn't do so. And I can tell you that afterwards, 10 years after, I decided that it was a mistake, how it was done. Why? Because the way how this intervention was done was not holding up to the standards of democracy, fighting for rule of law, and the international community's rules. And there you are, in a dilemma situation, which was back then, I mean, deciding about it 10 years after is always much more simple than in the 10 hours you have to decide that. But
should become historian.
Yeah. Exactly. Then you're always free to do so. Yeah. But I mean, I just tell that because I'm really convinced, also because of that, but about many other things, that the European idea and the ideal of this democracy, unity, and diversity, etc., this post-national idea and so on, it will never be perfect, and it will never be able to hold up to every demand and be able to act in every situation. We just see that, how enabled we are as European community to take decisions and to get forward with central challenges and so on. And somehow I feel that the question is somewhere out there, do you want to be part of sometimes unable and incapable union of democracies, or do you want to be part of a decision-making dictatorship with imperiously follows its interests, you know? So, and I understand that this decision, in some moments, at the moment, is not so easy, and that there are interests, your own interest, and many nations around, and governments in particular, where it's hard to decide if you go the one or the other way, also because these incapabilities have been so visible now, and the ability of some autocracies becomes visible as they do a good PR also on it. You know, so that's somehow in the air. That's only the reason, and I want to finish on that, why I sometimes feel we should be just honest also about that, you know, about the point that there are some inabilities, and in doubt, maybe it's not so clear how we will end up.
And to learn from that.
Yeah, and to learn from that.
So I want also from my side to thank you a lot for this very, very interesting discussion, and for the public and for everyone that here step in the discussion. I think that now we are 10 minutes running late. We have, we finish here the public part of the forum, and yeah, thank you for everyone who have been here. Super. Fand ich mega interessant.